Hello and welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 77. Uh, I'm really inconsistent about these now, but I had an idea today, and so here we are streaming. So today we're going to be talking about essential business gravy. So I was listening to Owen's stream, I think 11:35 or 34, something like that. Um, he was talking about essential workers, or not essential workers, but he was talking about how we have to keep on bringing in immigrants and the birth rates and stuff like that, and that there's no one to bring in to be able to do these jobs. And I think that might be a key to this idea of uh, a lot of this like essential business, essential worker kind of thing. A lot of times when the elite do this kind of thing, sometimes it's a wing from God. Sometimes it's them doing this to protect themselves from karmic justice, a whole bunch of stuff. But regardless of that, I think it's kind of a warning sign to what might be coming down the chute. So, what do I mean? So, basically, if we have a collapse where we can't. So, right now, people are looking for workers all over the place, and nobody can seem to find workers. And a lot of small businesses were driven out of business, and so in theory there should be a lot fewer jobs and things that we don't need to do, or things that there should be more people than jobs available, basically. But due to the current monetary, uh, people getting basically uh, more like $15 an hour to not work, a lot of people are choosing not to work, and therefore there's a economic difference in what is being, or basically people don't want to go back to work because it's like, oh, so I go to work and get paid $20 an hour, but in reality I'm getting paid $5 an hour because the not work rate is $15 an hour, right? So that's something we're dealing with right now. But I think a lot of this kind of ties into a bigger type of thing where uh, maybe a lot of these things that were done intentionally or otherwise were done because they don't have enough people in key industries to actually keep the whole thing going. So in reality, like, people say, "Oh, what's an essential business?" and all business is essential to have a functional economy and stuff like that. And for how the economy works in general, that is true, but in reality, not really. Like, we don't technically need restaurants. We don't need um, movie theaters. We don't need. There's tons and tons of stuff that we don't really need. Uh, in terms of what we kind of need to keep heavy industry and mass manufacturing of complex capital goods going, which is what I'm going to kind of define as our baseline of our economy and what really is the thing that propels and stabilizes and is the core thing that the economy does. I know that's a pretty vague thing, but uh, the things that you definitely need are you need food, obviously. You need raw materials. You need ple- ways to get these various raw materials and goods to the places where they're refined, and then move those to the places where they're changed from refined things into actual things, and all of this kind of stuff. And so there is a certain amount of supply chain. And I know Owen talks a lot about like trying to shrink your supply chains and stuff like that, and do it as much as you can. But there is always going to be a certain amount of long distance supply chains that you're going to be relied on. If you need to make uh, a hoe or some shovel or something like that, you need iron. Iron's like, maybe you have some near where you're at, but the chances are that is got to be mined from somewhere that's not near you. Go to some smelting place where it gets smelted and refined into steel, and then that steel is then used to make the shovel head. There's ways to shrink our overall supply chain on that kind of stuff, but those the breakage of those supply chains is what's going to really affect how far down the ladder we kind of fall in our next economic downturn. And I think there's a way to mitigate that, but I will talk about that in a little bit. So I think that is kind of th- thinking about essential businesses and essential workers in this light, and not this nonsense light that they've been talking about with the whole Corona Chan and all that stuff that's been going on for the last year and a half. now, I think is a better way to think about this whole thing, because in reality, there are kind of like essential workers. If you want the lights to stay on, and he was kind of talking about how the people that were most demonized are a lot of your white working class people who are line workers and plumbers and stuff like that. The people that keep the lights on, keep the feces and stuff out of your house, and so you're not living in squalor and filth, and all these people. And so those people are very important. They're going to become more important as we go along here, as things kind of collapse down. But what am I trying to say? Let me just kind of read some of the stuff that I wrote. The reason for the collapse of small business is because there weren't enough workers to fill those roles in key industry, fill all the roles of the key industries, things like metal manufacturing, raw resource gathering, stuff like that. Because if you don't have that kind of stuff, your trucks don't run. If you're not pumping oil out of the ground, your trucks don't run. If your trucks don't run, materials don't get to where they need to be. If materials don't get to where they need to be, you have no tools. If you have no tools, I guess you're digging plants with your hands, right? Like, tools are a cornerstone of a civilization and society. So anyway, roles to keep the lights on and get and consolidate and help facilities a movement of human capital into the industries. I think it was a signaling of steps that must be taken to mitigate and avoid hardships to come. One key industry that isn't talked about much is the tooling industry. So there's a story that I heard years ago where basically the place I was at was a replica 18th century lumber camp, right? You know, those reenactment type groups where they'll do various things. So basically, it was a lumber camp that was set in the 1800s, and one of the questions they asked us was, who is the most important person at the lumber camp? And generally, everybody jokingly says the cook, because everybody, you know, the classic Napoleonic phrase of an army marches on its stomach. But that wasn't actually the answer. The actual answer was the blacksmith, because the blacksmith is the one that maintained and fixed all of the tools when they broke and when things went wrong for the workers. And if they didn't have him, they wouldn't be able to do their job. And I think this is a very important aspect to to really helping us mitigate the amount of fallout that's going to happen over the next couple of years, and making sure that we can kind of get back on our feet quicker. The supply lines are important. The food is important. If you're as important as blacksmiths are, if you're dead, you know, you're not doing too hot. But you know, an economy is a very symbiotic and relationship, and a lot of little parts that work together to make a greater whole. And I really think that kind of your blacksmithing, your tooling industry is going to be very important coming in the next couple of years, and making sure and locking down the ability to create these tools, because you know, you can't, if you don't have machine tools and you can't make these tiny precision parts that you need, you can't have cars, because you can't make the screw to the dimension tolerance that you need to be able to bolt that engine head together. You can't make like whole tons of stuff. And so I don't exactly know electricity. You can't produce electricity because you don't have the tools to be able to make turbines. Like it affects basically everything. But you know, it continues on, right? Those people need food to continue. They need raw materials to be able to do their job. They need energy to be able to run the machines to make that thing. So, you know, I'm not saying it's like the most important, but you know, I think we need to getting farming and stuff and your own homestead secured is a good first step. But I think maybe this is threatening the beast too much. I personally don't think it is, but kind of getting ourselves set up and making sure that we start understanding and getting into key industries so that when the thing collapses, we aren't kind of caught out, right? if everybody's farming, that's great, but who's going to fix the tools? Who's going to make the nails to be able to build the thing? Who's going to cut the boards? Who's going to make the saw blades to cut those boards? Who's going to provide the energy? These are big questions that kind of need to be solved, and it's a daunting task to basically build an entire side economy. I understand that, and I maybe have an idea on where to start on some of this stuff, because I don't know how far back things are going to go, but I have maybe a way in which we can get to there. But, well, I guess I can just, well, I'll get into that in a minute. I want to also, no, I'm going to get into it now. So, basically, the idea that I had was a potential database. So, currently we have available to us amazing designing and drafting tools that they just didn't have back in the day. And so we should take advantage of those right now while they're available to potentially get a lot of these older pieces of equipment. Now, I know there's a lot of people that are passionate about designing a lot of this stuff, and it might already be on the internet. I do still need to do my research on that and see if I can find if somebody has already designed a lot of this stuff. But things we need to potentially consider is horse-drawn type stuff, whether it's buggies or what are they called? Threshers, things like that. Things, plows, and having the designs for all that stuff, and then getting physical copies of all that so that we have a blueprint for being able to rebuild everything. I don't know, like, if things collapse and we can't get tooling and all that stuff, like, how far back do we have to go to be, and we can't get electricity, like, how far back do we have to go before we can kind of catch our feet, right? Like, when the thing collapses, how many steps back are we going to take? Is it going to be, the 2 steps back, or is it going to be 12 steps back? Are we going to go back to, like, 1900s? It's hard to exactly know because of how intricate the whole machine process, or not the machine, but how an economy is so intricately interwoven. When one thing breaks, the whole thing breaks, and then, at what point does it catch itself is really hard to tell. I mean, maybe a good example would be some of the other revolutions. You had, like, the Bolshevik and your French Revolution, your, what's another one? China, all that stuff. And generally, industry was able to be maintained. Even Germany and stuff like that after World War II, a lot of their facilities and a manufacturing base was absolutely destroyed, but there was an outside power, that being the United States, that still had those capabilities that could help get those materials to them and still made those things, and then from there you could learn how to make those things. So as long as all of that stuff is maintained, it's fine. The question are the communication lines going to stay up so that we can communicate with places like China and stuff like that? If basically, we are potentially looking at the breaking of the US dollar as the world reserve currency. If that happens, I don't know what the fallout from that is, and I don't know whether or not economies are going to be interlinked, and whether or not we are going to be able to go to China to be able to get some of these goods and services that we can't produce because we kind of ended up in this jumbled mess of whatever is happening in America, and we have to rebuild various infrastructure. Now, we do have a lot of, as much as people say that America doesn't have any manufacturing base, we do have still a decent amount of manufacturing base here, so that is a good start. But if there's a massive war, which Owen doesn't think there's going to be, so, and if everybody just kind of dies, as it were, but even if you just have, let's just say you don't have enough people to cover all the industries and stuff like that, which ones are you going to choose? How much of a brain drain are you going to have by just not having people in these industries and then having to relearn how to efficiently run these industries? These are big potential hurdles that we're going to have to overcome in the next coming years, potentially. So in that regard, so let's say there's a contraction in the overall amount of people. Let's say that we don't actually have enough people there's a higher demand for various services than there are people to work those jobs, and there's no one we can import from other countries to fill those positions anymore. What hard choices do we have to make in order to decide what industries do we keep and what industries do we let go? And I guess a good basis to start is the homestead, right? So if more people start homesteading and gardening and stuff like that, what industries can we kind of let go? So that'll reduce the amount of pressure on farming and what we need to do for farms and things like that. So we have to farm less acreage. That'll help a lot if we have a drop off in the amount of food that we're able to produce. So that's a bonus. Um, we have what am I thinking? So another key industry is we need to be able to have transportation. We need tooling, right? So that means raw materials and how to make the tools. Those shipping lanes need to and transportation lanes need to be open. That probably means shipping. That means what's the term? Trucks and all that. So that's a lot of material that goes into making all of those and maintaining all of them. Now we have a decent amount that exists, so we're at the point where we could probably just maintain those at this point. But making sure that we have all the drawings for those, all of the knowing how to manufacture that stuff, making sure that we have the facilities to be able to manufacture the steel that is going to be required for that. And this is one of the good things that Trump did, is he protected the American steel industry by putting up tariffs and stuff like that, because China's basically been undercutting and selling steel at cost to try to drive steel, prevent us from producing steel. And if we stop producing steel, then we don't have our own internal source for producing steel, and then we're all of a sudden going to be reliant on Chinese tooling manufacturing. So that's an issue, and that's probably something that's going to come up in the book I'm reading on unrestricted warfare. So these are kind of some of the things that I think we have to think about, and I think putting together a database of all of the various drawings and various things of like, okay, what's something that we can... I still need to work this idea out a little bit more in my head, but, you know, are we going to need to make a 1800s thresher because we can't produce oil anymore, and therefore horsepower is back? Okay, what... how do we make one, right? If we have that drawing ahead of time and we make a physical copy of it and have, you know, people just kind of store those on the homesteads, we'll have a way to kind of gather that repository of knowledge together again and be able to figure out how to make these kind of things. And I think that will really help mitigate the backslide that we have and really kickstart us into the next evolution of whatever comes after the collapse. So those are kind of my thoughts on that overall thing. One other thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of design obsolescence. It kind of tied in with my thoughts on the overall industrial stuff. So design obsolescence and the lowering of quality may also be tied into having too many workers available. If you make a tool for yourself due to you not wanting to tie up your time fixing that tool, you would rather make that tool and rather make a very robust tool that doesn't need a lot of maintenance and doesn't need to be fixed very often. This trend continues when work is specialized but has a low output because production never really exceeds demand for the tooling. However, this script is flipped once production reaches a level where production outstrips demand, and then either further company diversification is needed or additional demand is needed to be found to keep that company afloat. So let's say I make a pickaxe, and it's a really good pickaxe that lasts 40 years. And I sell one to everyone in America in 20 years. Well, I got another 20 years before I'm going to have another customer. So that's kind of a problem. And so that's when companies kind of run into this issue of like, okay, well, now I need to make sure that I keep having demand. And this is kind of one of the problems of capitalism to a certain extent is, you know, this idea that you, if you're not growing, you're dying. And, you know, you could just, and part of it is also the scale in which you're working on these economies, right? If you just have like a smaller scale group, like let's say you're a blacksmith, right? And you fix stuff, and then, you know, but like one day you don't really have anything to do. You're nobody has any demand. You can either make other random things that maybe people will need, or you just go do something else. Okay, I guess I'm working on building something at my own house today, or I'm gonna go help Farmer Ed with uh, his homestead. I heard he needs help picking some beets today, and so you're gonna go off and do that. And so it makes your uh, the you have kind of greater you have labor mobility, but it's within a smaller community, and it makes you a little bit more flexible on what you can and cannot do. So it's I don't know, it's kind of an interesting idea. Uh, Therefore, the situation making a sturdy, lasting product is inefficient on a money-making sense, and designs are changed to reduce the quality or to increase demand. This, of course, is the erosion of trust built up that the this erodes the trust the company has built up, through delivering good products. But short-sightedness and limited option pool makes this option still a path many go down. Um, so yeah, if I come up with better ideas for what blueprints we maybe need, and maybe I'll start kind of doing some own designs myself because I am an engineer. I do have experience doing all this stuff. So I'll look into maybe stuff we can get and what already exists out there, because I know a lot of people do like making models and stuff like that for fun. So why reinvent the wheel as it is, and all that stuff. So hopefully you found this interesting. It was a bit of rambly. It was kind of, I don't know if it was incoherent or not, but I did think it was interesting, this idea that maybe the term essential workers is hinting at something, and that we don't have enough productive people to maintain the systems that we have, and we have to kind of choose what systems we want to keep in place and what we're going to need to maintain to be able to bounce back when the economic collapse happens. So there's a lot of different industries out there that are important, and so maybe it's something you guys need to think about, and think, oh, maybe I should try to get experience in this industry or that industry, or know how these various things work, so that we can come together when stuff does go south, and have the requisite knowledge to rebuild. But anyway, that's basically it for me. Thank you guys for listening. This has been According to Andrew. Please like, share, and subscribe if you are interested and thought this is good knowledge. And hopefully you have a good day.